Hi, this is Jen Rubin, editor-in-chief of The Contrarian. If it's Monday, it must be Pablo Torre. Welcome, Pablo.
Thanks for having me again, Jen. Somehow a lot keeps happening in the
It
weeks between our
does.
appearances.
It does. And it keeps happening to you. You have an exciting announcement. Tell us about it.
Yeah, so my show, Pablo Torre Finds Out, which I have now crammed down your throat thanks to Jen and the Contrarian. We've entered a partnership that's exciting because we remain an independently produced, independent show, but the New York Times and The Athletic have decided to partner with us, meaning that they're a licensing partner, meaning that they promote, monetize, sell ads on our show. They swear to me that we will get to do the show with the same people who make it now, with the same ambitions journalistically, investigatively that we have now. But in terms of having a place be interested in an independent, and I'll warm up to this word eventually, Jen, an independent creator who's chosen to do journalism as his means of being influencer-y, that has been a really eye-opening thing. And that starts September 4th officially. So yeah.
Wow, congratulations. And congratulations to the New York Times. You know, it's interesting. Just last week, we were talking about ESPN and this merger that they have, or a partnership that they have, where they're kind of now on the same side of and are going to be partially owned by the NFL. You don't have that problem. I don't think the New York Times owns any sports clubs last time I looked.
It's a rare delight to sort of find, and this is sort of the game, and this is why, by the way, starting off and preserving independence is so
Yes,
key. It's because then you can choose, okay, wait a minute, which dance partner wants to
right.
dance a similar sort of, waltz with you? And I am glad to be free of those conflicts in a very meaningful way.
Absolutely. And now you have all the leverage in the world. Who knew? Right? Well, congratulations
Thank
again. We
you.
will be looking for you there as well as here. We're not losing pop-up, so we're very
No,
excited
I
about
get to
that.
do everything I've been doing, I am told. And so this is just more and better and hopefully even more ambitious. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, let's talk a little bit of golf. We were talking last week about this kind of semi-playoff series that golf has set off. The first one, which helps St. Jude Hospital, was this weekend. And it was an extraordinarily exciting and, at least in golf terms, meaningful tournament because, on one hand, you had this really furious race and then an extended playoff, but also people had to get into the top 50 in order to keep going in this mega millions golf tournament. And Justin Rose, who hadn't won in a very long time, and I like because I always root for the older players, 45 years old, won after a string of birdies. Just an incredible round. But there was also the story of Tommy Fleetwood, the guy who
Yeah.
has never won a tournament, and has, I don't want to say choked, but kind of faltered in multiple tournaments.
Yeah.
Talk to us a little bit about him and what you think it is. Is this just now like a jinx that he can't get over? What's going on with him, do you think?
yeah, you're being kind, I think, and not using the word choke. I will use it. He choked, and it's not unique, right? We say this often, I think, in golf, that why this is why you get paid the big bucks, right? This is why golf is, despite the fact that it is a sport that involves zero running and no
Yes.
defense, still qualifies as a sport. It's because it's a mental, psychological cauldron in which you have to do really precise, difficult things under tremendous public pressure. And Tommy
Yes.
Fleetwood, the thing I will say about him is that even though he now has a reputation, which, by the way, Rory McIlroy was wearing at the very top of the game for
Yeah.
so long, as you've discussed previously, until he won the Masters, really, and is still kind of struggling with it. The thing I will say is that Tommy Fleetwood, A, is not alone, and B, the way that he conducts himself
Yeah.
is just we always look in these conversations, who can we feel good about in public life, and we are drawn to these athletes like Tommy Fleetwood because the guy on the one hand is Donald Trump, right? Then there's golf.com quoted this is sort of like a golf bill of rights in the
Yes.
rules of golf, and it's 11 words, and the phrase is play by the rules and in the spirit of the game. So on the one hand, you have Donald Trump, most powerful man in the world, violating that with aplomb,
Yes.
privately and publicly. On the other hand, you have the earnest, genuine failure of Tommy Fleetwood, who is Icarus, flies too close to the sun, collapses to the ground, but maintains his integrity. And I love that. Again,
Yeah.
it's maybe it's cold comfort to Tommy Fleetwood, but it is really admirable actually how he loses, which is a weird thing to say given that he chokes.
And he was so gracious in saying, well, I have to learn from each one of these, and next week is always another week. It's almost remarkable. And you contrast that to something very disturbing that happened last week when Naomi Osaka lost a final golf tournament, a final tennis tournament, excuse me.
Yes.
And rather than contribute to the aura of good sportsmanship, mumbled about 15 seconds of thanks and didn't congratulate or thank her opponent. That
Yep.
set off calls for her to retire. People were so upset. Now, maybe that's a harsh reaction, but you got to be able to lose in public. That's sports, isn't it?
It's sports and politics, right? That's
Yeah.
the common thread there. And Naomi Osaka has been
Donald Trump doesn't
fascinating.
lose either. There's
Oh, I
another
mean,
similarity. Won't admit he lost.
of course, of course. And Osaka is interesting because I have been watching her through this lens for years now, dating back to the US Open when very famously she complained about, and this happened at a bunch of championship tournaments, were just complaints about how hard all of it is. And something that I always think about is we are living at a time when young people like Naomi Osaka, especially, are ever more explicit about how it is that they would like to do things differently. You guys want to ask adversarial questions in the press. You're not our friends. They want to sort of push back on all of that. And I understand that on one level. But the through line here is that sports is supposed to be hard.
Yeah.
It is a game of failure more than victory. And that's for even the best in all of these sports. You fail more than you win. And
Yeah.
the whole thing about losing and accepting your own failure in public is that this is part of it. It is, in fact, to quote now Don Draper in Mad Men, it is what the money is for. And
Yeah.
if you don't like this version of it, I can understand. And I'm not here to tell a pro athlete, hey, maybe sports aren't for you, because God knows I cannot do so many of the things that they do quite easily. But
Yeah.
what I cling to as a person who loves sports and loves to celebrate and criticize sports,
Yeah.
it reminds me of that other quote we often say about America, which is that I love it so much that I would never surrender my right to criticize it. That's the thing with athletes too. You're supposed to struggle and sweat and flail and ask yourself hard questions because these people you don't like are doing the same.
Absolutely. And, we've talked over the last few weeks about such gracious losers at Wimbledon, at, the really the depths of despair in golf in other tournaments. And that is part of why we watch sports. It's not just like see these people wipe out. You don't go for the car crashes or whatever the equivalent, the triple bogey, but you do look for a certain kind of behavioral code. And golf is the code. As you say, it's not like you have to be 6'8" and 300 pounds, or you have to be 6'8" and 120 pounds. You're not a physical freak. It's a skill that takes tremendous control and mental energy. But it's nothing if it's not within this kind of very restrictive code of conduct.
It's supposed to feel like torture. And it's crazy. It's
It's
crazy to opt into that, but for those who do, you are distinguished by how you respond to truly, even what's the right word here? Um, the reason why I love sports is that humiliation is on the line.
yes,
And
it is true.
I'm not rooting for you, pro athlete, to be humiliated. But what
Yes.
I am always aware of is the degree to which I am impressed is the degree to which us normies would never opt in
Yeah.
to that high wire act. And that's part of what we admire. So to
Right.
those who succeed, applause. To those who fail, I love these conversations because they deserve that credit along those lines as well.
Absolutely. Now, there's a poor example of what sports should not be about that is in the tennis world. In two consecutive tournaments now, there is a player who we've spoken about, Davidovich Fokina, who has a reputation for, shall we say, faltering at the end. But in two consecutive tournaments, he's now, without any apparent injury, just retired. In one instance, he said, I'm exhausted. And just this weekend in Cincinnati, which is vying to be the fifth major tournament, we could talk a little bit about that. He just retired. What's that all about? And it's not just that people paid money to see that, but he used up a space that some young and up and coming player who didn't quit could have taken.
Yeah.
That's like just the worst, isn't it?
Yeah, and these are always complicated because I remember in the NFL, there's a controversy around the young quarterback for the Colts, Anthony Richardson, who took himself out of an NFL game, which is even
Yeah,
more unheard of, by the way,
right.
because in the NFL, of course, the whole point again is not merely consensual concussion, which it is quite literally, it's also
Yeah.
consensual injury. And so toughness is the utmost virtue. So it's just rare to see that there. The thing that I always struggle with is just trying to gauge the sincerity of the struggle. Because what you're describing, if it happens, what is it, three times, it's a trend. You just begin to worry that, and this is I mean, now we're connecting all of the dots here, but the ultimate insult to a sports fan, a consumer who pays money, especially to go to these games, the ultimate insult is when it seems like the fan cares more about the game than the player does.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm not saying that that's definitively the case here, but that is a cardinal sin.
Yeah.
And by the way, it's hard because the fan cares about this stuff psychotically at times,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
So
Hence the term fan. Yes.
fanatic is not it's
Yes.
not quite in the DSM, but it probably should be. I
Yeah.
agree. It's one of those things. So anyway, so I worry about just that distance that a tennis player or a football player can display.
Exactly. And you see the contrast just last night. Another player, an Argentinian player, not highly ranked, he's in the 40s, Hugo Cabrera, had a terrible injury. You could see his knee buckle. He fell to the court. He was playing Ben Shelton, who, like the good sport he is, came over to console him. He called the trainer on. He tried to work the leg. You could tell he was hobbled. He got back on the court. He tried to play a couple points and literally couldn't move. That, you would say, the guy really tried. It's really unfortunate. And no one faulted him. Um, Ben Shelton behaved, I think, admirably. He behaved admirably. It's like that's kind of what you expect from people. You try to work through it. That's what's admirable in many ways about sports is working through adversity instead of complaining and kind of going home. Um,
Yeah.
yeah. So I want to talk about a totally different topic, and that is we had the first woman call a Major League Baseball game. And I guess it raises the question, why did it take so long? Why aren't women umpires and referees throughout the men's game? There are men who are referees throughout the women's game. Are they like too fragile to call somebody out at first base? Are they too fragile to call double triples in the NBA? Why has this, kind of sex segregation, gender discrimination, and separation evolved? It seems bizarre.
It is fascinating. It reminds me in a different way, honestly, about how all of these trans debates around billiards, where it's like, wait a minute, why can't they
Why do
all
we
compete?
care? Yes.
Why are we policing that line? But look, I think when it comes to what it means to be a baseball umpire, there is a funny bit of history being made, which is that a woman finally has earned the right to be cursed at indiscriminately by a bunch of
Yes.
dudes in public.
Yeah,
Like that is what she has earned, and it is long overdue. And by the way, the history of this is interesting. So this is 28 years after the NBA referees broke the gender barrier, 10
right.
years, only 10 years after the NFL hired its first full-time referee. And you're right. I think that speaks as much to the folkways and the social networks that attend refereeing. And this is a whole other episode, literally, that I'm interested in, that my show, I long wanted to pursue. But the question of who becomes a ref, just
Yeah.
from, and it reminds me of various debates about STEM education, weirdly, where it's like,
Yeah.
who are you encouraging? Who is in the pipeline? How do they even become aware that this is a job they can do? And how do you
Right.
then make sure that those rare candidates do not feel discouraged because they are maybe alone in a room full of older people who are saying it must be done this way? I
Yeah.
think sociology is a key part of this, as well as just outright discrimination, because again, we're talking about decades upon decades. It's crazy that it's taken so long. But I would say you got to look to the refereeing networks and that pipeline as your first place to turn.
You know, as you've been talking, I have this mental image now of, this woman going jaw to jaw with the manager, and the manager like, kicks the dust and starts cursing at her. And, we've come a long way, baby. That's what we aspire to
Yes,
now, to be
progress.
like, have dirt kicked in our face, because that's what it's
That's
all
right.
about. Well, congratulations again, Pablo. The New York Times, The Athletic is so happy and so glad, I am sure, to get you. And we will look forward to having you back next week.
Thank you, Jen. We'll talk then.
Bye bye.